Hello, we're back with chapter 4, right? Chapter 4? Yeah, whatever we are. Geography 101, and we were talking about Mr. Malthus, who was a very cheerful guy, right? Actually, I don't really know the man. I can't say he was depressive, but his theories were. So we're talking about this idea, can population continue to grow with resources? And so if we were talking about how he said that there was always going to be that idea that there would be more people than food, and that would keep us in line, but recent technology suggests maybe not. And to kind of continue on that track, there's a lot of evidence that suggests that maybe even further methods could help us produce more food and resources. So the idea of closing the yield gap. So if you go to a farm, right, and they're growing corn, and they grow 100 acres of corn, and when all is said and done, when they grow it and they harvest it and they make it into food, basically only 95 acres worth of corn is used because some of the corn died in the field. Maybe a bug ate it or it got rot. Maybe some of it was lost in the harvesting. A tractor ran over it. Those little kind of things, right? You lose a little bit. That maybe we can be even more productive and take care of that. If you think of agriculture, right? If you're growing chickens and reducing the amount of chickens that die from disease would help. So this ties into the Green Revolution. So I'd mentioned the Agricultural Revolution. And the Agricultural Revolution and the Green Revolution refer to roughly the same thing, and that is using technology to grow more food. Now, the Agricultural Revolution of the 1800s involved using mostly machines, so going from horse-drawn plows to tractors, going to mechanical machines that replace the work of 5 men and allows people to grow more food. Um, but the Green Revolution begins in the 1950s, and this was actually done in India. In the 1950s, India's population was skyrocketing, and they had to import food every year. Not only what they grew, but they had to buy more, and there was always that threat of starvation. So scientists developed new plants, new versions of rice and corn and wheat, and they actually used genetic technology to make these more available. So instead of having, one grain of rice or one rice plant make 10 grains, it made 20 grains. Instead of having, this corn need X amount of gallons of water, it needed less water. So that you could make more food with these plants, using technology to make better plants, and also to design chemicals and pesticides that were more effective at killing insects or treating diseases. So using even a more advanced technology. Another thing that we've done to kind of put Malthus in his place is reducing waste. Um, a lot of food is wasted. Think about when you go to the grocery stores, right, and you see all those vegetables, lined up in the counter, really pretty. But what happens if they're not bought in time and they go bad? The store doesn't sell them, do they? Some stores will kind of wrap them up and put them on the side, sell them for half price. But at the same time, a lot of food is wasted. And if you don't believe me next time, go to a restaurant and look at how much garbage actually goes in that is food related. Another thing that we can do is change our diets. It's an interesting thing, and we'll talk about this. Meat and protein takes more energy and more resources than plant food. If you're going to eat a diet that is vegetarian, right, you're going to eat crops like rice and corn and grain. But if you add meat, something has to feed those animals, doesn't it? So not only do you still have to grow the crops that you eat for food, but then you have to grow crops to feed the animals, and the water that feeds them, and the energy it takes to process them. If everybody in the world committed to having at least one day a week of not eating meat, we would actually solve a lot of problems energy-wise in this world. In fact, the vast majority of the world does not eat meat because it is so expensive. Another thing we can do is expand aquaculture, using the seas for food, growing, or basically, growing fish off the shore in fish farms. But there's a problem with that. I know there's always a problem with something, right? And that's overfishing. So this map shows you in 1950 the status of overfishing. These areas that are in red were overfished. And what that means is quite simply what it sounds like. If you take more fish out of the water every year, at a certain point, there's not enough fish left to have babies for the next year. And if you get to that point where every year there's less fish because you've taken too many out, then you've overfished it. Okay? So this is 1950. Compare that, we're going down here, to 2005. And you see the vast difference. And what caused this? Well, the first thing is industrial fishing. In the 1950s, most fishing boats were small, 2 or 3 man boats. They would go out, take a little fish for the day, and come back. In the 1970s, we began to see these huge factory ships, ships that are the size of a cruise ship with nets that are 10 miles long. They basically strip mine the ocean for fish, and then upside they sail up to another ship that is the size of an oil tanker full of ice, and they load it up. So they can be out fishing and non-stop and basically suck everything out of the ocean. So wild fish, the amount that we've actually have available, has been in decline since the 1980s, and fisheries are declining in productivity. We've seen several species either go extinct or come close to it. And so one of the things they are suggesting is maybe we increase fish farming to replace wild losses. So for instance, instead of catching fish in the ocean with a fishing boat, if you go right offshore, off the beach, and you put in big nets so the fish can't get away, and you make pens and grow fish there. This shows you the status of fishing stocks around the world. In the 1950s, almost 80% of the world's fisheries were underexploited, which means that you could take as many fish as you want, there'd always be enough because people weren't taking that much. You get to fully exploited right here, and you can see it's beginning to grow, where you're taking the most you can take. Overexploited and then crashed. And crashed is where now what happens, even if you stop fishing, there's a good chance you won't get any fish at all the next year. You've basically fished all the fish. 32% of the world's wild fisheries areas have been overfished. So then, why don't we just do fish farming? Well, let's talk about Asian carp. I'm going to pause the video here for just a moment and you'll see why we have an issue with Asian carp.